Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The order arrived without warning, but its meaning was unmistakable. Prince William had authorized the complete and permanent removal of Queen Camilla's access to the crown jewels, royal vaults, ceremonial collections, and every private chamber holding the monarchy's most guarded treasures. For Camilla, it was not merely a restriction. It was a public wound delivered in private, and proof that the future king was no longer asking for permission. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William made his move during a restricted Crown Collection review at Buckingham Palace. The Crown Collection means jewels and ceremonial objects held for the monarchy, rather than owned as personal property. Senior officials expected routine questions about future state occasions. Instead, the prince placed a signed directive before them and ordered every permission linked to Camilla's name removed. Camilla had been able to request necklaces, brooches, tiaras, and ceremonial pieces for portraits, private fittings, and royal events. That access carried more than practical value. It confirmed that she stood at the center of power, trusted to wear objects tied to centuries of succession. Now William had stripped away her authorization codes, vault permissions, consultation rights, fitting privileges, and authority to request royal heirlooms. Nothing remained untouched. The Queen received the decision inside her private sitting room. She read the first page once, then again, as though the words might change. Her fingers tightened around the chair. When her senior aide confirmed that the future king had used the word permanent, she looked up with disbelief and fury. She did not ask whether the order could be delayed. She asked who had allowed it to reach her. Charles learned of the directive moments later. The king held the summary in silence, refusing to defend his wife immediately or dismiss his son's authority. That pause cut deeper than the order itself. Camilla had expected the monarch to stop William before the document crossed her threshold. Instead, he lowered the pages and said nothing. The removal covered more than jewels, linked to Diana, or pieces reserved for Catherine. It reached across the entire royal collection, turning a family dispute into a judgment about trust, control, and succession. A sealed appendix referred to a breach during a private jewelry inspection. Yet Camilla was denied access to the evidence. She demanded the name behind the complaint. One answer appeared again and again in the restricted file: Catherine. But to understand why William was willing to humiliate the Queen so completely, the private fears of Camilla, Charles, Catherine, and the future king must first be pulled into the light. Behind the locked doors and formal titles stood four people carrying four very different fears. Camilla feared being pushed out of history. Charles feared losing control of his family before surrendering control of the crown. Catherine feared that precious symbols meant for the next generation were being quietly redirected. And William feared that hesitation would allow a private dispute to become a permanent wound in the monarchy he was destined to inherit. Camilla had spent years treating access to the royal collection as proof that she had finally been accepted. The collection was not simply a room filled with valuable objects. It was the body of historic jewels and ceremonial treasures held for the monarchy across generations. Every brooch, necklace, and tiara she was permitted to request seemed to confirm that the institution no longer saw her as an outsider. Losing that access threatened more than her wardrobe. It threatened the identity she had fought to build. William saw those same objects through a colder lens. To the prince, they were inherited symbols, held in trust, never personal possessions to be used for influence, reassurance, or private status. He believed each piece carried a message about succession, and every careless request risked confusing who those symbols were meant to serve. The future king had therefore begun reviewing months of collection records, studying inquiries connected to jewels reserved for heirs, future queens, and senior members born directly into the royal line. Camilla confronted Charles in private after reading the directive. The Queen told him the order made her look temporary, as though everything she had gained could be removed with one signature. The King turned toward the window and struggled to answer. When he finally spoke, he said the dispute had moved beyond appearances. She stared at him, wounded by the words and even more wounded by the fact that he had not denied them. Catherine carried a different burden. She supported her husband's need to protect the collection, yet she understood what an open break with Camilla could do to the family. Before William entered the council chamber, the princess adjusted his cuff and lowered her voice. Once he signed, she warned, their relationship with the Queen consort might never recover. He looked at her carefully, but he did not step back. He believed delay had already allowed the danger to grow. Charles soon discovered something that unsettled him further. The prince had launched the private review without informing the reigning monarch, proving that his eldest son no longer believed every sensitive decision should pass through the king. That discovery left him caught between anger and reluctant respect. William had acted alone, but he had also acted with the certainty of someone already carrying the next reign inside him. Camilla dismissed her aides after the meeting. Alone, she removed a diamond brooch from her jacket and placed it on the table. For several seconds, she simply stared at it, as though an object that once confirmed her place had suddenly become evidence against her. Yet Catherine's warning pointed towards something darker, a forgotten ceremony at Windsor where one line had not been crossed slowly, but shattered. In a single moment William could never forgive. Every royal rupture has a moment that later becomes impossible to forget. In this story, it happened during a private Windsor Castle rehearsal, away from cameras and public ceremony. A locked display had been opened, an heirloom had been removed, and a request had been made in Catherine's name without her knowledge. When William entered the chamber, he immediately understood that the conflict was no longer about jewelry. It was about authority. Camilla had been pressing for greater control over jewel selections for major state events. The Queen argued that her position gave her broad ceremonial discretion, meaning freedom to choose objects used in official royal duties. William saw danger in that claim. He had already instructed collection officials that pieces connected to the future reign, Diana's legacy, and Catherine's eventual role could not be reassigned without written approval. The breaking point came during a private rehearsal for an anniversary banquet at Windsor Castle. Camilla ordered a historic emerald and diamond tiara removed from its secured display, even though the piece had been reserved for Catherine's future use. The Queen told the collection keeper that the princess had personally approved the change. He hesitated, but the authority behind her request left him afraid to refuse. Catherine arrived without warning and stopped when she saw the tiara beside Camilla's fitting case. The princess asked why it had been removed. Her voice remained controlled, but the shock beneath it was unmistakable. When the Queen repeated that approval had already been given, she denied it immediately. Catherine had never made the request, never discussed the piece, and never allowed her name to be used. William entered moments later and listened in silence. The prince asked his wife one question, then turned to Camilla and asked why Catherine's name had been attached to the order. The Queen replied that she had been preventing unnecessary delay. That answer changed him. He no longer saw confusion. He saw a boundary deliberately crossed. The keeper then produced a handwritten authorization note carrying Catherine's initials. The princess examined it and said at once that the initials were not hers. William took the note, folded it carefully, and ordered a confidential audit, a private investigation designed to trace who requested each royal piece and under whose authority. The review later uncovered several verbal instructions attributed to Catherine that she had never given. The room fell silent as the prince returned the tiara to its case. He closed the lid himself, turned the key, and handed it directly to the keeper instead of Camilla. No one misunderstood the gesture. Trust had ended in that instant. Camilla later demanded that Charles stop the investigation, but William refused to retreat. He requested a face-to-face meeting with the Queen. No aides, no courtiers, and no monarch standing between them. The audit had given him evidence, but the confrontation ahead would reveal something even more dangerous. Neither side was willing to surrender. There were no officials in the room to soften the language, no secretaries to reshape what was said, and no protocol to hide behind. William stood opposite Camilla, with the disputed authorization placed between them. She expected negotiation. Instead, the future king accused her of using Catherine's name to gain control over an heirloom she had been explicitly denied. What followed was not a disagreement. It was a collapse of trust. William had summoned her to a private chamber at Clarence House after rejecting every request to settle the matter through staff. Clarence House was the London residence used by Charles and Camilla, making the meeting painfully personal. The prince wanted no formal buffer, no carefully edited correspondence, and no aide taking notes. Charles had planned to attend, but his son asked him to remain outside. For once, the king could not shield either side from the consequences. William placed the handwritten authorization on the table. "You used her name," he said. Camilla pushed the paper back and insisted the arrangement had been misunderstood. The Queen claimed she had only tried to prevent confusion before the Windsor rehearsal. He did not raise his voice. That calm made the accusation feel even sharper. Camilla accused him of treating her like an intruder, after years of duty beside Charles. She reminded the prince of ceremonies attended, charities supported, and hostility endured in service to the crown. William answered that service did not create ownership. He told her that Catherine would not be pressured into surrendering symbols connected to her future role simply because the Queen wanted greater control. The evidence destroyed Camilla's defense. William explained that handwriting specialists and collection officials had reviewed the note through a confidential audit. An audit was a formal examination of records used to discover who made each request and whether proper authority existed. Their documented findings showed that the authorization had not come from Catherine's office, and the initials had not been written by her. Camilla finally admitted that she had instructed an aide to prepare the note. She argued that Catherine's earlier silence had sounded like consent, and that no deception had been intended. But the admission confirmed everything the prince feared. Permission had not been given. It had been assumed, rewritten, and attached to another woman's name. Camilla rose so quickly that her chair scraped hard across the floor. William did not move. The Queen warned that excluding the reigning monarch's wife from the collection would humiliate Charles and weaken his authority. The future king folded the note, returned it to the file, and told her protecting the crown sometimes required refusing those closest to it. Charles saw the answer before either of them spoke when the door opened. His wife's anger was raw. His son's expression was final. The confrontation had exposed the truth, but the greater battle now rested with the king, whose next decision would reveal where real power inside the monarchy had begun to move. King Charles still possessed the formal authority to stop his son. One instruction could have suspended the audit, restored Camilla's privileges, and forced William to retreat. Yet the decision carried a brutal price. Defending his wife might preserve their marriage but weaken the heir. Supporting his son might protect the institution but destroy Camilla's belief that the king would always stand between her and humiliation. Charles faced a crown-shaped choice with no painless answer. Charles understood that the royal collection rested on sovereign authority, household rules, custodial control, and succession planning. In simple terms, those systems decided who could request, where, protect, or reassign historic pieces held for the monarchy. The king could intervene because the final authority still belonged to him. Yet William's growing role gave the prince increasing control over assets tied to the future reign, especially those connected to Catherine and the royal children. Camilla met her husband in private before the household learned how far the order would go. The Queen asked him to cancel the directive immediately. She warned that silence would not look neutral. It would look like agreement with her punishment. Charles listened without interruption, but when she asked whether he believed she had intended deception, he could not give her the answer she wanted. Charles later opened the final audit alone at his desk. The king read the documented accounts, the handwriting findings, and the signed witness statements one by one. When he reached the final page, he removed his glasses and placed them beside the file. For several minutes, he said nothing. That silence was no longer hesitation. It was judgment taking shape. The evidence made intervention harder. William's order carried support from Princess Anne, the collection's senior keeper, and 2 constitutional advisors. Constitutional advisors are specialists who guide the monarch on how royal power should be used without damaging the institution. Anne had signed a private statement backing the restrictions, and her support prevented Camilla from dismissing the decision as a son's personal revenge. Charles then discovered the most painful truth. Several privileges enjoyed by the Queen had never been permanent rights. They had been informal permissions granted through trust. William had not created a new punishment from nothing. The future king had withdrawn access that could always be removed once confidence was broken. Camilla waited for her husband to defend her. He did not. Charles decided the directive would stand, asking only that she be treated with dignity during its enforcement. The king had protected the institution, but he knew the choice would wound their marriage. Within hours, staff members arrived to recover access cards, return borrowed pieces, and remove Camilla's name from the restricted request system. Charles had chosen not to fight, and now the Queen would watch her status disappear, one privilege at a time. The punishment did not arrive with raised voices or dramatic announcements. It came through polite knocks, sealed cases, revised schedules, and staff members who avoided meeting Camilla's eyes. Each small action carried the same message. The order was real. Her name was being removed. Her permissions were disappearing. And the objects that once confirmed her place beside the king were returning to rooms she could no longer enter. Camilla watched the household begin its work with cold precision. Her electronic permissions were disabled, private viewings were cancelled, and every future jewelry request was transferred to William and Catherine's joint authorization office. That office was the small royal team now responsible for approving which historic pieces could be worn and by whom. The change mattered because access had once allowed the Queen to act independently. Now even the smallest request would pass through the future king and his wife. A senior dresser entered her suite, carrying an empty velvet tray. Camilla knew what it meant before a word was spoken. The woman asked for the return of a historic diamond necklace intended for an upcoming diplomatic banquet. The Queen held the piece for several seconds, then slowly unclasped it. She asked whether Catherine had already chosen a replacement. The question sounded controlled, but beneath it lay wounded pride and a deeper fear that she was being replaced in public as well as restricted in private. The review separated personal gifts from crown-owned pieces. Personal gifts belonged to Camilla and remained with her. Crown-owned jewels, however, were held for the monarchy and had to be returned immediately. That distinction offered little comfort. The pieces with the greatest symbolic power were exactly the ones she could no longer control. Camilla soon learned that her planned appearance in the emerald tiara had been removed from the banquet schedule. Catherine would instead wear a different historic piece, linking the late Queen to the future monarchy. The princess had not requested the change, yet its meaning was impossible to miss. One woman's access was ending as another woman's role became more visible. Staff then uncovered a private list prepared for long-term ceremonial use. Camilla had marked several jewels she hoped to secure for future appearances. Some were reserved for Catherine, others had been protected for Charlotte. The discovery turned concern into proof that the struggle had reached beyond one tiara. Camilla dismissed everyone after the final case was taken away. She locked the door, sat beside the empty dressing table, and quietly began to cry. Charles arrived later, but the Queen refused to speak. She turned a framed photograph face down, not only because the king had failed to defend her, but because his silence had changed what their marriage now meant. That evening, Catherine faced William alone and asked the question he had avoided. Had justice become cruelty? Camilla had lost the jewels, but the prince now had to confront the human cost of the victory he believed was necessary. The turning point did not happen inside a council chamber. It came late at night, when Catherine and William were finally alone, and the machinery of royal authority had fallen silent. She supported the decision, but she could no longer ignore its emotional cost. Camilla had crossed a line. That was undeniable. Yet Catherine feared that a necessary restriction was becoming a public erasure, and that victory without restraint could damage the future they were trying to protect. Catherine understood exactly why the directive had been issued. Her identity had been used without consent, and heirlooms connected to her future role had been placed at risk. Those heirlooms were not ordinary possessions. They were historic pieces, reserved to represent continuity between one reign and the next. The princess knew that allowing such boundaries to be ignored would weaken both her position and William's authority before his reign had even begun. Catherine also understood the human cost. Camilla's position remained tied to Charles, and humiliating the queen beyond necessity could deepen the king's isolation. If the family shattered completely, the damage would not remain private. It would weaken the very institution William claimed to be protecting. That truth sat heavily between husband and wife. Catherine told him she did not want the emerald tiara assigned to her banquet appearance if its selection was meant to celebrate Camilla's removal. William argued that changing any visible consequence would make the order appear weak. The prince feared hesitation would invite further resistance. She answered quietly that strength was not measured by how completely an opponent could be crushed. William finally admitted what had been driving him. Seeing Catherine's name on the false authorization had filled him with anger. The future king had not only acted to protect the collection, he had acted as a husband who believed his wife had been used. Catherine took his hand and warned him that defending her could not become an excuse for vengeance. If anger controlled the decision, then Camilla would not be the only person changed by it. Catherine proposed a clear distinction between access and dignity. The queen should permanently lose control over the collection, but she could still wear specific pieces selected and approved for official duties. Camilla would never again enter the vaults independently, request jewels in her own name, or influence inheritance reservations. Yet she would not be treated as though she had vanished from royal life. William read the amended wording twice before signing it. The prince paused, then set down the pen. Catherine reviewed the clarification and confirmed that the crown remained protected, without pretending Camilla had ceased to exist. The revised decision reached the public the following morning. William had found the boundary between punishment and responsibility. But outside Buckingham Palace, one striking image was about to turn a private family wound into a national judgment. By sunrise, the secret was no longer contained. The removal of Camilla's access dominated broadcasts, newspaper stands, and conversations outside royal residences. Some saw William as a protector defending Catherine and the integrity of the crown. Others saw a future king humiliating his father's wife, while Charles remained silent. Yet one moment outside Buckingham Palace captured the entire conflict more powerfully than any commentator could manage. The palace released a controlled statement confirming that access protocols for the royal collection had been permanently revised. Access protocols meant the rules deciding who could enter secured rooms, request historic jewels, and approve their ceremonial use. The statement refused to mention the disputed authorization, but the careful wording confirmed that the restriction was not temporary. Camilla had lost independent control, and the household was not preparing to restore it. Broadcasters treated the decision as something larger than a family argument. William, they said, had begun exercising the authority of the next reign before becoming king. That mattered because the prince was no longer acting only as an heir waiting behind Charles. He was shaping how the monarchy would protect its symbols, its succession, and Catherine's future position. Supporters praised William for drawing a line after his wife's name had been used without consent. Critics answered that the order had exposed a private wound and turned Camilla's humiliation into a national spectacle. Catherine became a symbol of the future being defended. The Queen became a warning about how quickly royal privilege could disappear once trust was broken. Charles watched the coverage from his residence in silence. The king appeared deeply disturbed when one broadcaster described Camilla as the queen locked out of the crown. He heard the phrase repeated, looked toward an aide, and asked for the television to be turned off. Yet the words had already landed. His wife's punishment was now part of his reign's public meaning. Outside Buckingham Palace, a woman approached the gates carrying 2 flowers. She placed one white rose for Catherine and one red rose for Camilla, beside a handwritten card. Protect the future, but do not erase the past. The simple message captured the divided feeling better than any official statement. A major newspaper deepened the shock with a front page showing a closed vault door beneath the headline, "William turns the key." The image transformed the order into a symbol of power, moving from father to son. Camilla saw the 2 roses in the morning paper and asked that the page be left with her. For the first time, the Queen understood that some people saw both her wrongdoing and her pain. The palace then confirmed the amended arrangement. She could wear approved pieces for official duties, but independent access was gone forever. The world had delivered its divided judgment, but the emotional verdict could only be reached inside the family, without jewels, titles, advisors, or locked doors between them. The final meeting began without ceremonial jewelry, official folders, or household advisors. 4 chairs had been placed around a small table, and for once, rank offered no protection. Camilla had lost her access. William had secured the collection. Catherine had prevented punishment from becoming erasure. Charles had accepted that his son's authority was no longer theoretical. What remained was the harder task, admitting what had been broken and deciding what could still survive. William spoke first and made the final position unmistakable. Camilla would never again enter the royal vaults independently, authorize requests, or influence the future allocation of crown heirlooms. Crown heirlooms were historic pieces held for the monarchy and passed through generations as symbols of continuity. The restriction would not be softened, delayed, or quietly reversed. The prince wanted no confusion. Trust had been broken, and the boundary would remain. Catherine then confirmed the balance she had fought to preserve. Approved pieces could still be provided to Camilla for official duties, protecting the dignity of Charles's reign without restoring the authority that had been abused. The princess made clear that this was not forgiveness without consequence. It was restraint. The queen would not be erased, but she would no longer control what belonged to the crown. Camilla finally acknowledged the truth. The queen admitted that using Catherine's name had been wrong, and said fear had shaped her judgment. She had feared becoming irrelevant, feared losing her place, and feared that history would remember her as temporary. But she did not excuse what she had done. She accepted that she had claimed privileges that were never fully hers. William accepted the apology, but he did not pretend that words could rebuild what had collapsed. The future king explained that the restriction was not revenge. It was the lasting consequence of crossing both a personal and institutional line. His voice remained calm, yet the weight behind it was final. Camilla reached into her handbag and placed the disputed access card on the table. William did not take it. Catherine reached forward, closed her hand around the card, and carried it to the collection keeper waiting outside. That single act ended the struggle more clearly than any decree. Charles then admitted his own failure. The king told his wife he should have confronted the tension earlier, instead of letting silence deepen resentment. He also warned his son that future authority must be guided by discipline, never anger. The verdict was complete. Camilla remained queen beside Charles, but her control over the crown jewels was finished forever. Her position survived. Her unchecked privilege did not. William emerged as guardian of the next reign, while Catherine became the moral force preventing power from turning cruel. The vault door closed with Camilla standing outside it, but the monarchy moved forward with its inheritance protected, its boundaries restored, and its future placed firmly in William and Catherine's hands. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.